Thank you for allowing me to present 1418 this morning, and for the record, I am Jim Guthrie, serve in the Senate, represent District 28. Senate Bill 1418 is proposed policy that would allow school district employees to conceal carry on school property. I'm going to hit a few highlights, but I'll be somewhat brief in the interest because there is considerable interest in this legislation. I'd like to hear what others have to say as well. Just to kind of briefly go through it, on page 1, lines 25 to 27, you'll notice that peace officers, that's been an inclusion there in addition, that whether they're on duty or off duty could carry. And on page 2, you'll begin to notice several definitions that include the definition of governing board, immediate control, school employee, school property. And it defines employee of the district that can carry, and those employees included a person hired to perform a service who receives compensation and works under the supervision of the control of the school. It does not include independent contractors, volunteers, or students. And school property means property owned, used, or leased by the district. On page 3, it requires enhanced concealed carry permit and annual refresher training in order to continue to carry. It provides safe harbor from discipline, retaliation, or adverse work conditions because an employee opted to carry as long as they comply with the policy. Page 4 provides for confidentiality, that it won't become part of the employee's personnel file. If a change in status were to occur, in other words, if someone had their right to carry revoked for whatever reason, it would be the responsibility of that employee to notify the governing board within 48 hours. Nothing shall prohibit the rights of an owner of private property, including a private school, from either permitting or prohibiting the ability to conceal carry. It provides for an exemption from civil damages against a school employee, or school board member where a claim arises out of a lawful carrying, possessing, or non-use of a firearm for having a policy. There's liability protection for those who, for whatever reason, choose not to engage in the event of an active shooter situation. It is not mandated, but if a school chooses to display a gun-free zone sign, it must also include language that says, in effect, except as provided by local authority. On page 5, there's a new section, and the highlights of that are, and I think this is an important one, provides for local control. Policy to be developed in consultation with local law enforcement and set by the local governing boards. It requires a policy to be in place by January 1 of 26 and an implementation date by July 1st of 26 to allow time for a thoughtful development of a policy. Allows for a few options for the ongoing training, which includes an option for a course instructor or a program recommended by law enforcement. Additional language to protect confidentiality and exemption from disclosures found on page 11. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I think I'll stand for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Any questions for the good chairman? No questions. Thank you. We do have quite a few people signed up to testify. So how we're going to handle it is we'll go until close to 10 o'clock. We have to be on the floor at 10:30, give us some time to ask some questions and vote. So I will go back and forth from those who are for and against to give as much equal time as I possibly can give. And we're going to keep testimonies to 2 minutes. So please be respectful of that time. There's quite a few people who want to testify. So let's keep it to 2 minutes. And from there, we'll start off with Robert Gillis. He wants to testify in person. There you are, Robert.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, committee members.
Good morning. If you could just state your name and who you represent.
Robert Gillis from Idaho Tough on Crime. I'm a 25-year law enforcement veteran, retired out of Los Angeles County. I have hundreds of hours of formal active shooter training. I know you hear from other witnesses that also have active shooter training. I also have the dubious experience of experiencing an active shooter. I responded into a school I actually had to deal with wounded and dead kids. We had a lot of problems while we were in that incident. We had 5 total that were either shot or wounded, shot or died, and then the suspect killed himself on the campus. As the event evolved, we had to search the school. We had a gunshot victim in a classroom on the north side of the school. We had a gunshot victim down in a band room. We had 3 down in the quad area, and we had 1 in the offices that ran into the office. Problems that we encountered: school went into lockdown, classes were locked up, we couldn't even get in. We couldn't find people with keys. Same stuff I saw going on in Uvalde. The school was locked down. There's windows still that are in the doors, but they're still hard to breach if you don't have a key to get in. However, the Uvalde shooter was able to break a window on a door and get into a classroom. But we couldn't get into doors. It took us a long time to find kids. I'm in an interesting, unique position right now because I testified for House Bill 415 and now I'm testifying against 1418. The reasons why: I think that it's making it too restrictive. I think that we were looking at adding training into 415. There's verbiage that I see in 1418 that's actually stuff that I myself typed. So I know what's in this bill. Things have been changed and massaged, but I think that they're being made so difficult that this is never going to get implemented in reality. The school districts, the school boards dictating are going to actually prevent anything from happening. And since Columbine, what have we done to harden our schools? The shootings are still happening. As I sit here right now testifying, there are people in this country that are planning the next shooting.
Mr. Gillis, if you could wrap up, please.
Okay. I think we're on borrowed time. I think that we are, we got to understand that it could happen at any day, any time. It could happen today in Idaho. And I just hope that we do something better, and I'm voting no on 1418. I'm asking you guys to do the same.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you for your time. Do you have any questions?
Yes, one question. Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Gillis. Thanks for your testimony and for your service and your experience. So one of the, we're kind of juxtaposing 2 bills, which we shouldn't be doing in this particular hearing. So we're just looking at this one piece. But one of the things that I understood that we had, I think, some differences between different proposals was that training piece. Can you speak more about the language that you wrote and why training could be an important addition to previous proposals?
Mr. Gillis.
Mr. Chairman and committee members, I absolutely agree that there's got to be some sort of training. You can't just willy-nilly hand guns to people and say, here you go, walk around the campus, you're good to go. I'm also cognizant of the Second Amendment, the right to carry, but schools are a little bit differently. Airports, courts, we do decide where people can carry and where training is needed. We have a ton of training. Myself and a couple people I recognize in this room, we have a ton of training in this field. I rewrote 415 and added in active shooter training. I added in twice a year range qualifications. I recommended it so that the bare minimum is the enhanced concealed carry. And then the way I amended 415 was that basically the local control, as the chairman testified to, that's sitting out here, they should have local control. They should be able to enact whatever kind of training that they want to add in. If it's active shooter training with Meridian PD or with Ada County Sheriff or Boise PD, they should be able to do that. Mandating it, the reality is, and delaying this until 2026, do we have 2 more years before there's a shooting in our school? We've already had Rigby Middle School's been hit. We got lucky at Rigby Middle School. We had 2 students and a custodian that were wounded. Nobody died. The gun was taken away from the 12-year-old girl. The population's increasing here. If we don't add training and make it recommended, I think it's a disservice to everybody. I think we need to have people that know what they're doing. I think the people that are going to volunteer for this, the more training that you incorporate, the less people that are going to want to get involved. You may have 1 or 2 people at a school that decide, yeah, you know what, I love shooting, I'm going to do this. I have the law enforcement experience or the military experience or the hunting experience, and yes, I want to do it. I'm willing to go through the training. Those are the people that we want. That's what we want the schools to do. You're not going to have 25 people at every school that say, yes, I want active shooter. They're just not going to do it. It's too much work. But there should be training. I added in the active shooter training. I added in the range qualification training. I just think it should be recommended and not mandated. I think the school should decide at that point.
Thank you, Mr. Gillis.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Looks like we're good. Thank you, Mr. Gillis.
Thank you, sir.
Yep. Let's go to Jacqueline Hamilton from Meridian, District 21.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, members of the committee. My name is Jacqueline Hamilton. I'm a resident of Meridian, Idaho, a graduate of NAMP, Idaho, a parent to a child currently enrolled, and a graduate of the West Ada School District. I'm here representing myself. I grew up in a family that hunts, owned guns, and taught myself and my brothers respect for firearms. Normally, I would be standing here opposed to any bill requiring firearms in schools. I do not believe that a more guns everywhere approach makes us safer. And I certainly don't believe that our children should be in classrooms with an armed teaching professional. Studies have shown that having more armed people in any area makes us less safe. Our own Idaho Office of School Safety and Security reports have never intimated a need for additional firearms on campuses. While I cannot state my approval for this bill, I would like to recognize the hard work and common sense measures this bill provides, such as if schools have no other alternatives, such as a robust law enforcement effort to respond, then other measures need to be considered. Those measures, such as annual active shooter training, de-escalation techniques, and approval to carry from those that work closest and law enforcement are some of the best measures I've seen in recent gun expansion bills. I appreciate the effort it took to include stakeholders to state what would be needed and lawmakers' willingness to compromise, because that's what legislatures should do, work together to reach an accord. So while I cannot fully support this bill, I also cannot strongly oppose it, and therefore I remain neutral, and I thank you all for your time.
Thank you, Ms. Hamilton. Any questions? Thank you for testifying this morning. Let's go to Mr. Birnbaum.
Fred Birnbaum, Idaho Freedom Foundation. Good morning, committee. Good morning, Mr. Chairman. We stand in opposition to 1418. There's an old expression, a camel is a horse designed by a committee, and this seems like a camel to us. It seems like it was designed by a committee. And I'd like you to please turn your attention to page 5 in the bill. It's a new section, 33.527. And if you go down to line 25 on page 5, it starts with the list of the policy must include, but not be limited to the following. So it could even be more. Personal qualifications, appropriate firearms and ammunition. So basically, a school board could say, you can't carry a .357, you could carry a 9, you can only carry hollow point, not full metal jacket. Then it goes on to say training, initial and annual firearms requalification, nationally recognized active shooter. There's a lot of prescriptions in the bill. And as an earlier testifier pointed out, this places the hurdles so high and potentially higher because it says not limited to by these boards. It's really going to potentially prohibit. Currently, there are some schools that do allow some people to carry firearms. This is more restrictive, could easily be more restrictive than what's in current law. So yes, while it might expand which schools can do it, the hurdles are very high. And I think that's very problematic. If you think about Idaho, we have constitutional carry, we have enhanced, and can you imagine asking people who already have an enhanced permit to do all these things in every other situation to carry a firearm? We think it's excessive. And I'll just close by saying the signage requirement doesn't make a whole lot of sense. It says gun-free zones, except according to the provision of this section. Someone coming up on the school would probably still see a gun-free zone sign and then some small lettering. Thank you, and I'll stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Birnbaum. Any questions? Don't see any. Thank you for coming this morning, Fred. Carolyn Gray. Is Carolyn here? Perfect. Good morning. How are you?
Good.
Okay. Time is yours. If you could just state your name and represent.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you to the committee for hearing my testimony today. My name is Caroline Gray. I am a resident of Boise. I am testifying for myself. I'm a lifelong Idahoan and a Republican voter. I grew up around guns, hunting and fishing all around Idaho. I value responsible gun ownership and safe gun storage. I truly appreciate the hard work that you all have done to work with everyone to craft legislation that is thoughtful and measured. I'm in favor of this bill. I believe this gun bill is better than what we have now and is much safer and more common sense than what we have seen to date. I think it is a good compromise for Idaho. Thank you.
Thank you, Caroline. Any questions? Don't see any. Thank you for this morning. Ms. Klein with NRA. Good morning, Veen.
Good morning, Chairman, honorable members of the committee. For the record, Aveen Klein, District 15, State Director for the NRA. Unfortunately, before you today in opposition to Senate Bill 1418. Before you is the NRA's supplemental written testimony. You will see the NRA's major issues with 1418, mainly new section 33527, broken down into training, authorization, and drafting issues. I do appreciate Chairman Guthrie's efforts here. However, the version of school carry before you is not a compromise on House Bill 415. It is a wish list from those who oppose 415. If the legislature wants local control, let status quo stand. If you'd like to advance school employees' right to keep and bear arms, I urge a hearing on 415. But 1418 goes above and beyond what is required by current law and injects gun control provisions into Idaho code. 1418 arms school boards with unfettered subjective discretion to establish unobtainable requirements for school employees to carry. School boards are not experts on firearms. There is no justifiable reason an elected education official should determine the type of firearm or ammunition an individual may carry in self-defense. That is a highly personal decision. A school board's ability to determine the appropriate use of force in self-defense situations undermines Idaho's stand your ground laws. 1418 is a step backwards on a slippery slope for Idaho, eroding status quo rather than strengthening a school employee's ability to defend themselves at their place of employment. I respectfully urge a do not pass recommendation. Thank you, and I am happy to stand for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Klein. Senator Ruckey.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Ms. Klein, when you view Senate Bill 1418, do you do it through the prism of it being a Second Amendment rights bill or a school safety bill?
Ms. Klein.
Chairman, Senator Ruckey, I believe this is a Second Amendment issue placed on schools.
Thank you. Any other questions for Ms. Klein? I don't see any. Thank you, Veen. Appreciate you being here this morning. Quinn Perry. Good morning, Quinn. How are you?
Good morning. I'm well, thank you. Good morning, committee. My name is Quinn Perry, and I'm the Deputy Director for the Idaho School Boards Association. ISBA's official position on 1418 is neutral, as we have members who are going to fall on both sides of this legislation. Our organization has always maintained a position that the locally elected school board is in the best position to determine their school safety policies, including if it arms staff or not. That said, I would like to speak to the changes in this bill that differ from another bill from the body across the rotunda, if that's allowable. While this bill will force schools to adopt a policy in authorizing staff, we're appreciative that it creates a floor and not a ceiling for how school boards work with their staff, their parents, and their community members for how that process will work for their neighborhood public schools. In the 15 or so school districts and charter schools that have policies that arm staff, they all require some level of training beyond the basic enhanced carry permit. That is first and foremost because our students deserve that, but it's also to mitigate risk and truly to prepare these individuals for what may happen when they're faced with an unthinkable situation. I've said this before, but in districts where they do have training, they often require active shooter training, and they've often found that their staff take that training and ultimately decide that carrying on school property is not for them. I know in this building we're often trying to tackle these tough and emotional policy decisions, but I want to thank Chairman Guthrie, the education groups, including the Department of Education, and the various law enforcement groups that put a ton of time and attention into coming up with a consensus piece of legislation. My predecessor always told me that this work is truly the art of negotiation, and while it may not make everyone happy, we believe this is a workable piece of public policy at the district and charter level. With that, committee, I'm happy to answer any questions about the policy. Thank you.
Thank you, Quinn. Senator Wintrow.
Thank you, Mr. Chair and Ms. Perry. There was previous testimony about concerns with signage and board policy. From your perspective, if you were listening to that, could you address those for me?
Ms. Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Senator Wintrow, I think there was a lot, the concern I think I heard about the gun-free school zone sign, and I'm so sorry because I have to refer to the other pending legislation, so I hope that's allowable. The other one said that you had to remove gun-free school zone signs, and we thought it was a compromise to say that instead you add an additional provision saying that certain persons may be authorized to carry. Even under the previous bill, the general public could not carry a gun on school property, and we felt like it was creating an unnecessary contact with law enforcement because still the general public is not allowed to carry on school property, even under the previous bill. The concerns about school policy, I realize that folks may have concern about the implementation date, but we felt it was really important that school districts not rush a school safety policy and that they really work with their parents and community members. The training language included in the policy is all recommended by law enforcement. So I know they'll have folks here today who will talk to that. Previous versions of this law were going to cap the 15 or so school districts at the knees who had worked to create training requirements. So this won't cap those 15 districts that have worked to have safety policies. This will now, though, force every school district and public charter school in the state to have a policy on enhanced carry, and they get to determine with their law enforcement and their community what works for them. So this is truly meeting the balance of local control. So, yeah.
Senator Ruckey, do you have your light on? I can't tell.
Yes.
Senator Ruckey.
Mr. Chairman, Quinn, as you talk to your 15 school districts that already take advantage of this sort of policy, can you just drill down a little more into why you feel local control on this issue has been important to them in tailoring policies, and why you think it'll be important to other districts as we move forward if this bill passes?
Ms. Perry.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and Senator Ruckey. I think it's important to maintain the local control because not two communities look identical in the state of Idaho. South Lemhi and Bruno Grandview look very different than Boise High School that's just down the street. Boise School District and West Ada, they're able to have armed school resource officers on staff at nearly every school in their district, while Bruno Grandview cannot. So I think it's important to maintain that local control because no two communities look identical in Idaho. And even though the locally elected school board is elected as an educational representative, they're still a lay elected citizen community member. They are parents, they are farm workers, they are you name it, they are also community members, and they're the conduit between the district and the community. So it's important to maintain that to ensure that it reflects the values of their community.
Thank you, Quinn. I appreciate you. Next up, Christy Zito. Good morning, Ms. Zito. How are you?
I am good. How are you?
Very well, thank you. Time is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. I am Christy Zito. I am the political advisor for the Idaho Second Amendment Alliance. And I am here today to testify against Senate Bill 1418. 1418 codifies gun-free zones. This is unconstitutional. Gun-free zones do nothing more than tell those intended to bring harm to our children that that is an option in this area. We believe that those carrying a firearm have a personal responsibility with the tool that they have chosen to defend themselves with. However, we oppose yearly mandatory training requirements and any additional mandatory requirements. We believe the government does not have the right to determine when a person can defend themselves or those around them. Senate Bill 1418 will allow school boards to take away a person's personal choice of firearm and ammunition. The choice, of a firearm is a very personal issue. We all choose a different firearm for different reasons, the way it fits our hands, how comfortable we are with it. There's no place in government to tell a person what they can carry and how they should. This should not be regulated by any board of any kind. By giving control to the schools, which does maintain local control, SB 1418 does not provide an appeals process for school staff who wish to be in a position to defend their lives should the school board deny someone the ability to do so. Senate Bill 1418 will not become law for another 2.5 years. This bill effectively kills school carry and does not promote it. That's the end of my testimony. And I would like to add, I emailed to the entire Senate this morning the Gun Owners of America analysis of Senate Bill 1418. Thank you.
Yes, any questions? I don't think so.
Thank you so much for your time.
Have a good day. Morgan Ballas, in person. Good morning, Mr. Ballas. How are you?
Good morning, Mr. Chair, members of the committee. My name is Morgan Ballas. I'm the president of the Idaho Association of School Resource Officers. We represent 200 SROs across the state, and on behalf of those 200 SROs, we support Senate Bill 1418. This bill is the demonstration of the power of collaboration between members of this committee, the law enforcement community, and educational stakeholders. This bill strikes a brilliant balance between providing a pathway for educators who want to make the personal decision to carry a firearm on campus to protect themselves and their students, as well as maintaining local control for school boards to be able to collaborate and work closely with law enforcement partners to develop policies and training programs that best fit their community. That can look however those boards want to look. There are some considerations in terms of what those outlines are as they are in the bill. And I want to say that those outlines came from policies that are already in place across the state. We looked at the current policies of those school districts that have adopted these, and it does not undermine those policies at all. We use those as a model for them to move forward. We want to state that we are in favor of this. We ask that you vote a do pass recommendation, and so that way we can continue to work with our school boards and our partners to keep our students safe. I'm happy to stand for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Ballas. Any questions? Senator Winder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Morgan, great to see you again, and thanks for coming over today. When we visited a couple of weeks ago, we talked about the immediate response need within schools or any kind of incident. Can you share a little of your experience on that? Because I know you have some.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Mr. Ballas.
Mr. Chair, thank you, Senator. So first and foremost, our family has been impacted by a mass murder incident. My mom was present at the shooting of Congresswoman Gabrielle Giffords. She was at the table when it happened. She saved the life of Ron Barber, who went on to be a representative in that area. I spent the past decade of my life, because of that incident, both professionally and academically, in studying targeted violence, specifically targeted violence in schools. I'm a PhD emergency management candidate. I will be, as part of my dissertation, interviewing school administrators on their active shooter policies, perceptions, and beliefs. The biggest concern for law enforcement when responding to an incident like this, I would say, isn't as much whether or not we may potentially shoot an armed staff member. We go through a lot of training to mitigate those risks. My concern in not having collaboration with local law enforcement in introducing these policies is that if we do not create a plan and know who is carrying on campus and have created a plan to identify them in the moment, What it does is it drastically delays our response time to getting to victims. And those victims do not have enough time. Based on emergent research, there's about a 10-minute window for victims that could have survived their wounds. So we're talking about a gunshot to the upper chest or back. Law enforcement needs to get to them as quickly as possible. If there are armed personnel on staff and we have not created a plan on how to identify them, I must treat them like a suspect. And the 2 to 5 minutes that it's going to take to determine that they're not a suspect and that they're safe is going to prevent me from getting to our kids and helping those individuals. That is why this legislation is so important. Educators should have a pathway to be armed. There is evidence that supports that can mitigate both the number and types of casualties. However, it should be done in a thoughtful process. And by this bill allows the opportunity for school boards to work with local law enforcement in order to determine what is the best way to do that at the end of the day to help our students.
Follow up, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Winder.
Thank you. We also visited a little bit about Uvalde, where literally hundreds of police officers were on scene and did not respond properly. Is there some kind of a balance that we can achieve where people can defend themselves in a situation like this, whether it's the shooting of the Congresswoman or school shootings?
Mr. Ballas.
Mr. Chair, Senator. Absolutely. First and foremost, even though this legislation delays the implementation, that's for policy, for school boards to come up with thoughtful policies. There's nothing to stop a school board tomorrow from enacting a policy that allows their staff members to carry. Second, this is a beautiful piece of legislation that moves school safety forward, but there's other areas that we can improve in terms of response. First and foremost, we can introduce legislation to define a school resource officer that creates a pathway for us later to set standards of training for SROs so we don't see similar failures that we saw at Uvalde or that we saw at Parkland. Second, our state right now has no standard for what type of response schools should be using internally. We have a decade of research that says that we should move away from a lockdown-only response, that we should move towards an options-based response model. Emergent research supports that. Empirical evidence supports that. Those are all things that school boards can do on their own or through future legislation do as well. To your point, Senator, and to testimony earlier, again, there is nothing stopping a school board between now and when this is enacted in order to put forth policies to allow teachers to be armed. And more importantly, this legislation mandates that there will be a policy. There is no question. Educators will have a pathway to move forward if they're making that personal decision.
Thank you, Senator Winder. Senator Ruggie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Ballas. So can you kind of walk me through how you think or how you view this legislation would work practically for law enforcement? They get a call, there's an event at one of their schools, and they are now going to, on the way to the school, or once they get there, identify who else in the building is armed under this statute. And what happens from there? I mean, that seems like they're going to be worried about other people being armed. They may be out in the hallways because they are armed and they're trying to do something. It seems like it creates some chaos.
Mr. Ballas.
Mr. Chair, Mr. Senator, let me start by explaining the law enforcement mentality of responding to an active duty event, especially if you're an off-duty officer. The current training and the current recommendations is that officers do not self-deploy. That means if I am off duty or maybe I am from a different agency, that I am not, especially if I'm in plain clothes, that I am not directly going into that site if there's already been a command post established. And the reason is because we don't want a blue-on-blue incident where officers are shooting other officers. Now, of course, if we need to go in, we are going to go in, and that's the way it should be. But the idea is if there's uniformed officers already on scene, that you're going to that command post and they are assigning you somewhere or teaming you up with another officer, right? What this legislation will do in working with those school boards is that now we have the opportunity as law enforcement to train directly with those individuals, to get face-to-face to know them, as well as to establish other policies. For example, there's many school districts where the educators that are carrying, they might have something in their pocket. It's a lanyard that they would pull over themselves that quickly identifies them in the moment. So it's not just a face-to-face. There's an actual visual representation. Some of those things might say school guardian, they might say school safety, or something of that nature. And there's law enforcement officers that follow that as well, who, when they are off duty, they will carry something similar. So that way, if they are going to respond, we reduce the chances of a blue-on-blue incident.
Thank you, Mr. Director. I have a quick question. Since you come from law enforcement, any discussion with the sheriffs or the chiefs regarding this legislation?
Mr. Chair, I will say that law enforcement partners across the board have been involved in this process, to include members from ICOPA and ISA. I know that they may not be represented here today, but there was a discussion among the leaderships of those organizations and IDASROs of both the pros and cons of this legislation. And I will say that we did work collaboratively to come together to find a reasonable balance of what those standards of training are. Those standards that are in the current legislation are very broad, and again, built off of models from districts that already have this in place.
Perfect. Thank you, Mr. Ballas. It's been very helpful.
Mr. Chair, thank you.
Braden Miller. It's Braden Miller here. There you are, Braden. Good to see you, Braden. Time is yours.
My name is Braden Miller. I'm 23 and I graduated from Nampa High School in 2019, and I'm testifying mostly in favor of Senate Bill 1418. After Joe Biden introduced the Gun-Free School Zones Act of 1990, and after the act was signed into law by George Bush Sr., the frequency and severity of school shootings has tripled in the United States. The Columbine event happened while the act, which was amended in 1995, was in full effect, and since then there have been cascading and sequential school shootings as a result. I have and never will understand the logic that disarming those who look after our children will keep them safer. As I attended middle school and high school, events such as Sandy Hook, Parkland, Virginia Tech, and countless other shootings, I, as well as many of my peers, were constantly on edge thinking of the possibility that our school could be next. I would scan the classroom looking for anything I could use to defend myself against a shooter. The practice of leaning against a wall in the dark, like sitting ducks with our faces shoved in our arms, is nothing but a revival of the useless Cold War era duck and cover nuclear drills. I knew that whatever law was on the books, it would do nothing to persuade the conscience of a would-be mass murderer. My high school theater teacher kept a bat in his classroom office, but what good is a bat going to do against 5.56 or 9x19? Of course, people will say this is what school resource officers are for. However, as we saw in Parkland and Uvalde, and after numerous Supreme Court rulings such as Warren v. DC, Castle Rock v. Gonzales, and DeShaney v. Winnebago, law enforcement cannot, should not, and will not be trusted to protect us, nor do they have any legal obligation to do so. The one issue that I do have with Senate Bill 1418 is, contrary to House Bill 415, it seems that enhanced license holders who complete a qualifying training course can still be denied the ability to carry by their governing board. The United...
Mr. Miller, if you could wrap up, please.
Yes. I still support the bill in its current form, however, because I believe that school staff who are willing do need to urgently protect our children. So I ask that this bill be put on the governor's desk and signed into law.
Thank you, Braden. Any questions for Braden? Thank you, Braden, for being here this morning.
Thank you.
For your testimony. Okay, have a good day. Julie Davis, Boise, District 19. Is Julie here? Okay. How about Griff Marshall?
Good morning, Chairman Guthrie and members of the committee. I am Griff Marshall. I'm with the Idaho State Rifle and Pistol Association, and the ISRPA strongly opposes State Bill 1418. House Bill 415 eliminated the roadblocks that have historically prevented the ability of our school employees to protect our children. who are undeniably our most vulnerable and precious citizens. This bill contains all the usual roadblocks to greatly inhibit the chance of school employees to carry a gun. For maybe 20 years, Oregon has allowed anybody with a carry license to possess a firearm on school properties with no known adverse incidents. Only recently has that changed to allow school boards to restrict carrying. At this time, Alabama and Utah also allow anyone with a permit to carry in their schools. New Hampshire allows all licensed persons, but students, to carry in their schools. Historically, training has been used to obstruct the ability to carry. The training programs in this bill do not exist, and there is no one certified to do the training or the specification of the instructors. Currently, civilians are not allowed to take law enforcement classes, and civilians cannot even take the NRA classes that are provided for law enforcement officers. Among the many problems with this bill we have are firearm and ammo selection, the possible presence of contractors in our schools, the training and requalification classes, and unrealized costs that could be passed on to those teachers and staff that would like to protect our students. 94% of mass shootings happen in gun-free zones. This bill presents the illusion of the opportunity of being able to carry a firearm to protect our most vulnerable citizens, but in reality, it does not change the current situation where school boards have absolute discretion over whether to allow carrying or not. Thank you, and I will stand for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Marshall. No questions. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Let's go with Stu Hobson, Meridian, District 21. One of my favorite districts.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman, committee. My name is Stu Hobson. I'm here representing the Idaho Association of School Resource Officers. I recently retired after 25 years of law enforcement in Nampa Police Department, and 22 of those years was a school resource officer. And first and foremost, I'd like to say I don't think anybody here in this room or discussing this topic has anything other than the safety of our students and staff first and foremost in their mind. The one thing in the 22 years as a school resource officer that I'll touch on is I always got questions about shouldn't we let people carry on school grounds? And the question or the answer for me was always we got to think about the mindset and the training that goes into it. And that was always my concern, was that teachers are not trained. They aren't, their mindset isn't the same as law enforcement, and be able to make that split-second decision in a high-stress environment is very difficult. And teachers aren't, when they're in a school, they aren't just defending themselves. They have to be thinking about the little ones, the high schoolers, the rest of the staff. And so that's why this training component is so critical to this bill, is because it will start to give them that mindset and to be the ability to make that split-second decision in a high-stress environment that will not only protect them, but protect everybody in that school environment. I think that is critically important. The ability for law enforcement to carry on and off duty, and mostly it leaves the ability for local control. The school districts need to have that ability to decide which weapon is used, what ammo, all these things that this bill represents. It gives them that local control, and I think that is ultimately is important because it's their environment, their area that they need to be able to protect. With that, I'm fully in support of Senate Bill 1418, and I'll stand for questions.
No questions. Thanks, Stu. Appreciate
I have one question, Mr. Chairman.
Excuse me, Stu. Senator Winder.
How does limiting someone's ability to carry a weapon of their choice or selection of ammunition add to the protection of anyone? If the school board could say, well, you can carry a .22 because that has less possibility of injuring someone else accidentally, or, just versus what a law enforcement officer is allowed to carry.
Yeah, exactly. Senator Winder. That's very much the point, right? There's all types of weapons and types of ammunition. Even as in law enforcement, when we started being issued patrol rifles, the ammunition that we were allowed to carry had to come from the department, and it was a lower penetrating round. It's a slower round so that you don't have over penetration. And those are the considerations that need to be, that is why this is in the bill, because we don't want a staff member carrying a super high-speed round that's going to go through 4 sets of walls and not stop until it hits something more substantial, like an innocent body. So we want to have some control on what kind of weapon is used and also the ammunition, so that it is safety, right? I mean, that's what this bill is designed to do, is protect our kids and our staff. And certain rounds and certain types of weapons do not match with that safety concern.
Thank you, Mr. Hobson. Actually, 1 second. We had Mr. Ruckty, Senator Ruckty.
Mr. Chairman, sir, isn't it reasonable to want the person who's going to carry weapons in the school to carry a weapon that they've trained with, as opposed to introducing a brand new weapon that they haven't trained with ever?
Mr. Hobson.
Absolutely, Senator Ruckey. That's very true. You want to use a weapon that you are comfortable with, that you have practiced with, and that's why the ongoing annual training would address that, the qualifications, so that they continue to use that same weapon. This bill is not saying that the district is going to mandate only one type of weapon, and it may not be familiar to that person. The idea behind this is the district can allow whichever weapons they want, but and allow that person to use that weapon they're familiar with, but it's going to outlaw, certain weapons. For example, you can carry a AR-15 that's collapsible into a small backpack, because it folds 3 different ways, and now you have a high-powered rifle as opposed to maybe a 9mm. And so that's the control that the districts would have, is to set some limits. But certainly the person who's going to carry wants to carry something that they're familiar with and have trained with.
Thank you. I have a question. For those who may not know, what is the difference between a hollow point ammunition and a full metal sleeve ammunition? And what would be the benefits and negatives between allowing or not allowing those type of ammunition to be used on campus?
Not being a firearms expert, certainly not ammunition expert, I don't know that I could speak to the difference between the two, other than a hollow point is going to slow down upon impact. It's going to spread out on impact, and so it's going to not over penetrate. There may be somebody in the audience that could better answer that question for you, and I don't want to do that incorrectly.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Hobbs. Thank you. Let's go with Kylie Castela. Is Kylie here? There she is. How do you pronounce your last name? Did I get it right?
It's a silent W. Castella.
Castella.
It's weird. Yeah.
No, my burnt. We're on the same page. It's weird as well. So I completely agree with you. I got it. Very familiar. So Miss Castella?
Castella.
Castella. All right. Perfect.
Thanks.
Time is yours.
Thank you.
Castella.
Thank you, everyone on the committee. I was born in District 6, grew up in District 7, and now live in District 14. I am here representing myself. I'm a daughter of public school educators and a school board member. I'm a mother of small children who are about to enter the local school districts here. I'm here representing myself, but also numerous friends and family on both sides of the aisle about this bill. I grew up around hunting. I own a firearm. I grew up around the culture of respect for firearm, respect for training, respect for making sure that you're doing everything in your power to have everything be safe. And while I respect really
all the amendments of the Constitution, including the Second Amendment. I think that when we're talking about school safety, we have to be extra careful about the safety involved. We all have rights. Those rights end where someone else can be hurt, right? I can say whatever I want. I have the right of free speech, not if it's hate speech. I can do whatever I want with my body, not if I'm punching you in the face. I think the same goes for carry. I think it's great to have the Second Amendment, but I believe that this really is a school safety bill. And I think people like myself and other parents, other community members are the ones who are going to be affected if and when a horrible tragedy occurs in our schools. And for that reason, I think that it warrants a large amount of measure and tempering and compromise between our locally elected school board members who we trust and law enforcement. And so for that reason, I notice that my time is up, and I would like you to vote yes. There are things I don't love about this bill, but I really appreciate the care and safety that went into it for my kids.
Thank you so much. Any questions for Ms. Costello? Thank you. Good. Thank you. Marcia Bravo. Is Miss Bravo here? There she is. Ms. Bravo, welcome to committee. If you could introduce yourself and state who you represent. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman and members of the committee. Thank you for this opportunity. Yes, my name is Marcia Bravo, and I am an Idaho native. I'm also a retired educator who had the privilege of teaching in Idaho public schools for more than 40 years. And I will frankly admit that a horrific event which took place on April 20th, 1999, changed my life as a classroom teacher forever. Yes, I am referencing the deadly Columbine school shootings. It was a day like no other. And for me, school safety is paramount. It means everything. It is the most important responsibility we have for our students. And for this reason, I support S 1418. Someone said it is a brilliant balance. I agree. I think it provides the best possible option to safeguard students at school. S 1418 reflects a broad range of critical components, which greatly improve school safety through strict program oversight, professional training, and a well-defined personnel selection process. S 1418 permits school boards to work in consultation with law enforcement to develop and adopt the best policies. It mandates significant initial and continuous training for the employee to maintain eligibility in the school safety plan. This employee must comply with federal firearm laws. So I ask you, will S14 make our schools safer? I feel the answer is yes, and I urge you, please support S1418. I'll stand for questions.
Thank you, Ms. Bravo. Any questions? No questions. Thank you for
Thank
testifying. Have a good day. Next up, Shannon Oxford from Boise. In person. Is Shannon here? Did I already ask for Shannon? No, okay, she's not here. Nathan Guy.
Good morning. Morning, Chairman and Committee. Thank you again for letting me speak to you. Nathan Guy, owner of Faith Outdoors, father of kids in school. So I'm here representing my store, my customers, and my kids. I'm here to ask for a no vote on SB 1418. I would rather have no law or bill than a bad bill. I won't have a long speech today, as I'd like to save a lot of my words for when we're talking about H 415. I hope that's soon. SB 418 acknowledges the necessity for enhanced concealed carry permit holders to carry on school campuses, aligning with practices in Utah, Idaho college campuses, and most private schools in Idaho. This, I believe, is favorable. However, how do we navigate this terrain collectively? The enhanced permit surpasses Idaho's existing laws already. In lines 27 through 36, you have them in front of you probably. I'll talk about those. Line 35 and 36, why impose an indefinite additional training? I know Idahoans already go above and beyond what is required. I shoot on average 50,000 rounds a year. The average Idaho permit holder shoots 5,000 rounds a year. To qualify for your post or police officer standard training certificate is 40 rounds. Just 40 rounds to qualify your post. Line 27, appropriate firearms and ammunition. I've been selling firearms, ammo, accessories since 1993. There is not a one-size-fits-all gun, ammo, holster, optics. This needs to come from the permit holder on what they know is best for them, as well as the help from experts like myself and other retail stores in the area, not from a board or an agency. Line 30 and 34. My concern here is that most law enforcement agencies do not have the resources to develop this type of program. They don't have the extra staff, the time, the range use. This doesn't even take account for rural agencies with even more limited staff. The free market is already doing this. Enhanced permit holders are already willing to take more training without school board or agencies telling them what, when, where, how to train. Some boards could impose training that is unattainable on how this law is written, and they will never get that chance to carry. In closing, I agree that we need enhanced carry permit holders to be allowed to carry in Idaho schools. Unfortunately, I oppose SB 1418. I do stand for questions, though.
Any questions for Mr. Guy? I don't see any. Thank you, Mr. Guy. Appreciate it. Margie Bass. Is Margie here? Ms. Bass, welcome to committee. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for letting me speak. And
our pleasure.
Thank you to the committee.
Our pleasure.
My name is Margie Bass, and I can't believe I am speaking in favor of any bill putting more guns in our schools. But I am indeed asking you to vote in favor of S 1418. This is a compromise bill. Our school's primary occupation, their primary charge is the safety of our children. And I appreciate the school boards being involved since this is their charge. There has been a continued onslaught of bills to get more guns in our schools the last several sessions. I have written and testified vigorously against these bills. As a retired teacher and school counselor with young granddaughters just starting grade school, I am truly scared at the prospect of armed faculty in our schools. There are some elements in this bill which allow me to accept it, which have been missing from the other bills. It is important that the school boards have authority to determine if an employee should be authorized to carry a weapon, and that this decision is made in conjunction with law enforcement. I like that only employees of the district can qualify to carry rather than volunteers or contractors. I like that the amount of training is much more extensive and it will be ongoing with local law enforcement. I also like that the person authorized to carry is tied to a particular school property and cannot go into other schools. Allowing school districts until 2026 allows them time to get these programs in place. There are other points in this bill that help to calm my fears. So after talking myself through this, I do ask you to vote yes on 1418. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Bass. Any questions? Thank you for testifying this morning. David Pettinger. Good morning, David.
Good morning, Chairman. State Affairs Committee had an opportunity to be in front of a few of you yesterday. Senator Harris missed you yesterday in the Health and Welfare Committee. We could have used your vote.
If you could identify yourself.
David Pettinger, District 14. We could have used that Republican vote yesterday to.
I object. Please stay on this topic, Mr. Pettinger.
I'll stay on the topic here. So school carry, I spoke, called in to Governor Otter when he was in office, and it was near the previous school shooting that was referenced earlier. And at that point in time, it was the Nate Shillman show. And Governor Otter at that point in time said, and I know many of you worked with Governor Otter, but at that point in time, he said that he was in favor of a school carry bill. And I think that this is many years in the making to get to this point. Why am I in opposition to 1418? Well, 1418 seems to be carving out some of the concerns that people were having with 415 online. If you followed some of the conversation, people were concerned that Ted Hill, who was carrying 415, didn't have contractor carve-outs, that he hadn't been in consultation with people that would benefit commercially, financially from those carve-outs. And I think that potentially some of that consultation has occurred in this particular bill. So I did work in the school districts for a period of time. I worked with disabled students, and I can tell you that I've spoken to some people that train people and will be training people if this bill goes forward. I've talked to them about some of the critical points that I have not seen in a school shooting up to this point. I think that if someone understands these critical points, we are destined to see school shootings that are substantially worse because of the amount of children that are present in particular areas on the campus. So I would say to vote no on this. I think the first bill, 415, is a lot better, and I'll leave it at that. Stand for any questions.
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just for a comment, Mr. Pettinger, just so you know, this is a really busy time of the year, and Senator Harris was presenting a bill on the other side of the rotunda. And so whether you want to express an apology now or you want to just hold that, but I think that would be appropriate.
Mr. Pettinger. Chairman Committee, I would like to express an apology to people of Idaho that we did not have that vote. Thank you.
Mr. President, thank you. Done. Diana David.
Good morning, Chairman and members of the committee. I'm Diana David of Boise. I'm a retired insurance industry risk manager. I'm a gun owner, and I'm also a survivor of gun violence. I know what it's like to hide from a killer and what it means to carry to save your life. My family lived everyone's worst nightmare for 243 days because of gaps in legislation. S 1418 is the best version of this type of bill since I've been testifying in Idaho for the last 10 years. It contains proper requirements and input from a range of education and law enforcement professionals who are experts in their fields. That said, as an expert in my field, I also know allowing guns in schools invites the worst situations, and stats show guns in the custody of adults on school properties still can end up in the wrong hands, and it does happen numerous times a year, causing injuries and death to students or faculty. As a survivor, it's frustrating these types of bills are promoted as the answer when we've had, it's more of a Band-Aid, when we've had some common sense legislation that has been removed in the past. And one of the things that gets to me is school shootings are overwhelmingly connected to domestic violence in the home or suicidal thoughts. And when we have ERPO laws, which we don't anymore, or secure gun laws, both of those are number one and number two to prevent these types of situations. It interferes with our ability to give our kids the best protection. When we require nothing at the foundation and then backtrack, I worry about creating gaps like my family experienced instead of providing a widespread safety net to protect our kids. I personally know these Band-Aids aren't enough, but if Guns in Schools bill is going to make it through this year, this is the smartest bill I've ever seen, ever. So, thank you.
Thank you, Ms. David. Any questions? Yes, Senator Wintrow.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I know I've been quiet. But Ms. David, I really appreciate your testimony, and I'm so sorry for the experiences that you have had. I think this is the first testimony I've heard that actually perked my ears about prevention, and that we as government constantly look at response instead of prevention. But you touched on a few things, and I think it is important to say, even as we're looking at this type of legislation, in your estimation and your experience, what might help us prevent these kind of events so we could maybe decrease the need for this kind of law?
Ms. David.
Chairman, Senator, we actually had some options, extreme risk protection orders. There was an executive order that was issued, I think it was 2021 or 2022, and that was stripped here in the state of Idaho. And unfortunately, a lot of people didn't understand. Extreme risk protection orders, or what's also known as a red flag law, they can only be requested by a law enforcement officer, a medical professional, or a personal family member who knows a person is a danger to themselves or someone else. And there was a lot of fear rolling through, and I heard a lot of testimony that people thought someone could be angry at you, make a phone call, and suddenly the cops are going to show up and take your guns. First of all, it's a false report, and the person doing that is going to be subject to laws, breaking the law for that. But it doesn't work that way, and only a healthcare professional, mental health care professional, or a family member, or a cop responding to a delicate situation would know that that would be the way to go. So we lost that option, and that was that's the number one prevention level to stop actual school shootings. There's statistics showing that. The other one is gun storage laws, which has been talked about since I came back to Idaho to retire in 2014, and we don't have that, but it would be helpful.
Thank you, Ms. David.
Anything else?
Thank you for testimony.
All right, thank you very much.
Next up, let's go online to Roberta Olson. See if we can get her. Here she is. Good morning, Roberta. Can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
Perfect. The time is yours. You have 2 minutes. And if you could just introduce yourself and who you represent, greatly appreciate it.
Thank you to the committee and the chairs for this time. My name is Roberta Olson. I represent myself. I have lived in Idaho with my husband for the past 18 years. I want to thank Senator Guthrie for consulting with the Idaho Sheriff's Association, State Police Association, School Board Associations, Department of Education, teachers, School Resource Officers Association, and private security groups for their input into Senate Bill 1418. Senator Guthrie has listened to and taken into account the need for local control of our schools. The school boards, teachers, resource officers, sheriffs, and police officers know their community the best and know their schools the best and what their schools need. This bill includes both law enforcement and school boards in making policies for concealed weapons on school grounds. Thank you, Senator Guthrie, for listening to and respecting local control of our schools. Now, this bill is a compromise. I had a hope that all school boards would have the right to opt out of the requirement to create a policy for allowing school employees to have concealed weapons on school grounds. That's not what's in the bill. I understand this bill does not give me everything I wanted, but it is a bill that respects local control of our schools. So I support the passage of Senate Bill 1418. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Olson. Any questions? No questions, Ms. Olson. I hope you have a good day. Thank you for testifying this morning.
Thank you.
Chair Adams. Good morning, Ms. Adams. How are you?
Good morning. I'm well. Thank you. Good morning, Chairman and committee. Thank you for being here today. So my name is Tara Adams. I am an Idaho native. I've lived here all of my life. This is home for me. I have raised 5 children in the Boise schools. One of them is still in the Boise school is currently in the Boise school district. I am surprisingly in favor of Bills S 1418. While I don't love it because I've not found any evidence supporting the notion that more guns in gathering spaces makes us safer, I, however, very much appreciate the thought and care and courage that Chairman Guthrie displayed in this impactful legislation. He has shown exemplary leadership through active listening and cooperative compromise between many interested parties and stakeholders, especially the local stakeholders who have the safety of our Idaho kids at heart. This type of cooperation will be critical in finding common ground to address the fact that firearm-related injuries are the leading cause of death to Americans between the ages of 1 and 19. Some of you may think that because I'm a survivor of the historic Las Vegas mass shooting, that I'm an unreliable source of testimony on these issues due to possibly high emotions clouding my judgment. I assure you, after a lot of help from a lot of different places, I crawled out of that darkness, and I'm here, and my eyes are clear. And I'm here to work with anyone that is interested in keeping our communities safe from both intentional and unintentional firearm injuries and death. We need to remember that we are writing the future for our children. What do we want that to look like? Let's write them a good one and a safe one and a one in which they can all thrive. In the spirit of cooperation and gratitude, I offer my support and I am in favor of Bill S. 1418. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Adams.
And thank you.
Appreciate you testifying. Any questions for Ms. Adams? I don't see any. Thank you. Have a good day. Last but not least, we have virtually Alice Aramburi. Let's see if we can get her. Here we go. Alice, can you hear us?
Yes, I can.
There you are.
Thank
we see you. Alice,
Hello?
Hello. If you could
Yes.
state your name for the record and who you represent, you have
Yes.
2 minutes.
Okay.
Thank you.
My name is Alice Arambari, and I'm joining you remotely from Coeur d'Alene. I live in District 4, and thank you for taking testimony today. While I'm not in favor of all or most schools in Idaho having armed employees in them, I have to say that this bill, S 1418, has a lot of common sense components that make such a situation more reasonable and acceptable and regulated as it should be. I want to list some of the positives in this bill. It makes it clear that not just any employee carrying a gun can do so at every school they choose to. Only an employee of a specific school may carry on the school property where they're employed. School boards would maintain authority to say yes or no to a request for authorization. It specifies that it is concealed carry only. The employee must have immediate control of their weapon. No storage in a drawer, purse, closet, etc. It requires training initially and ongoing with specific rules and regulations that are so important. This creates 2 levels of authorization by the school board and by law enforcement to review the person's qualifications. The employee must comply with federal firearm laws. It keeps gun-free zone signs up, and it maintains local control. I have to say, there is one huge drawback to this bill. It is the confidentiality of gun carriers to coworkers and parents. The Idaho Parental Rights Act is not considered, and I believe this is a huge problem. I have a daughter who is a teacher, and I have a granddaughter who is a student in the Coeur d'Alene School District in middle school here. And I can't believe that her parents would not want to know who is armed in her school. Thank you.
Perfect timing, Alice. Thank you for testifying this morning. I don't see any questions for you, so I hope you have a good day. Thank you for
too.
being
Thank
with
you.
us. All right. That's it for those who have signed up to testify online. Is there anyone in the audience that may have wanted to, or signed up with the paper in the back that would like to testify? No one. Interesting. Chairman Guthrie, it's all you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee. You know, you hang around this place long enough and you're able to enjoy opportunities where there's such powerful testimony.
Yeah.
And regardless of how the bill comes out, it's really indicative of the process that I think is appropriate for the citizens to be able to come, and I so appreciate their testimony and involvement. Just a couple of things on some of the testimony, and then I'll go through some closing remarks, Mr. Chairman. It was indicated by a few that the hurdles are too high. But you know what? We're talking about an environment where a lot of times police officers can't even make the right decision because it's the heat of the moment. You don't know what's going to happen. I believe the hurdle should be pretty high. Let's talk about the gun-free zone signs, and keep in mind that's if the school decides to post them. It's not mandatory that they do. I really appreciate the testimony of Morgan Ballas, the SRO officer. He's very modest because his credibility is beyond reproach. He has a history of these things, and that was really powerful testimony to hear, me knowing his background as I met with him earlier in this process. Stu Hobson mentioned that something I think is important to note. There were some concerns about ammunition and guns, appropriate ammunition. And he drew out the distinction if somebody has a high-powered firearm that's going to go through a couple of walls before it stops. I think it's very appropriate that they look at the ammunition criteria. I was particularly moved by Miss Adams' testimony. I think all of us can speculate how we would act or react in a situation. She was in a situation. And for her to come and share that story is pretty powerful. Mr. Chairman and committee, I had no intention of playing in this space when this session started. But those of you who know me, when something comes to my committee that I have concerns with, and the concerns are flowing in from even members from across the rotunda that voted for 415 and didn't feel comfortable with it, I felt like maybe I should engage and see if there was a balance. And I'd like to start my closing remarks by, and keep in mind, this issue has come up for years, and it'll continue to come up for years, so hopefully we can strike some kind of balance somewhere. But I'd like to begin my closing remarks by posing some rhetorical questions. Does your overall philosophy view the glass half full or half empty? When you look outside on a day that's somewhat overcast, do you think partly cloudy or mostly sunny? And when you look at a modern painting, do you see paint flung on a canvas or a work of art? And when you look at a tough issue, do you see an obstacle or an opportunity? When I look at today's hearing, I see opportunity. Will this bill become law? I don't have any idea. But what I do know is that discussions like this will eventually get us to the right place with the right policy decision, and I thank those that have shared their thoughts today. Mr. Chairman and committee, we can oftentimes look at the same thing and see it differently. That's something we love about living in a free country. We can agree to disagree. We can have different perspectives. I'd like to share some thoughts on how this discussion developed over the past 10 weeks and how I became entangled in this. There's been some comments, particularly online, and there's been hundreds of emails that I didn't include others as this was drafted. And so just briefly, the history. I was only told about 415 in vague terms at the start of the session and wasn't talked to about it again until the day it was up on the vote for the House floor. And I tried to work with the sponsors to see if it could be amended. There was thoughts about pulling it back to committee in the House. Ultimately, that was not done, and they ran it. But from the start, I told the NRA and the sponsors that I would not be comfortable here in 415 that I would like to see amendments. I was very upfront and honest about that. At any rate, it passed and it came over, and we talked again. We drafted the amendments to actually amend 415, but we reached a stalemate and an impasse, and I have no problem with that. We're all entitled again to our opinions, and I have so much respect for the Senate sponsor of House Bill 415. But because of that impasse, and I didn't feel comfortable just moving forward amending his bill, you have 415 or 18 or 1418 before you. Because we didn't end up agreeing, it doesn't mean there was an absence of inclusion. But I will tell you who was not included in the original draft. No one in the school system. No one was included. So as we worked on amendments on this side, in addition to involving the Senate sponsor of 415, I talked with everyone in the school system, from Superintendent Critchfield on down, and law enforcement personnel, SRO, and I talked to several student groups. I believe that's as it should be. You know, senators, we get offended when the federal government tells us what to do as we advocate for local control and protection of our state sovereignty. With a policy this potentially impactful and emotionally charged, I choose to err on the side of local control. Yes, policies will be different, but school districts are different. Response time in Boise might be 5 minutes. It could be 30 minutes or more in rural areas. So the thought process as policy is developed, it'll be different, and it should be different. I don't think any of us will argue that we are talking about our most precious resource, our children, and just as relevant are those who teach them. As we leave today's hearings, many will go back to offices, businesses, construction crews, and so on. As we do, let's remember those in the classrooms all over the state right now, teaching our kids and grandkids in the very environment we seek to create policy for. You've heard all the questions. You've all heard this question. Is it easier to remember who won the Super Bowl or the World Series last year, or some of your teachers? For me, Mrs. Gunner, Mrs. Green, I'm sorry, Mr. Chairman, Mr. Gittens, Mr. Brown, and so many others come to mind. Doesn't that local human infrastructure deserve to be part of the discussion? Mr. Chairman of Committee, this is a school safety issue. Again, I don't know the fate of this policy consideration, but even if it fails, I will tell you that some of the hateful and threatening emails, and hundreds, by the way, that have been directed towards me will be worth it if going forward we involve those embedded in our school systems who care so much about the education and safety of our kids. At the very least, they've earned a seat at the table. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Any questions for the good chairman? No. That was some powerful testimony. I really appreciated the testimony by the good chairman and those who, all those who testified this morning. This is a tough topic. It affects so many different people at so many different levels, and so I really appreciate the respect that was given this morning, and so we'll see where it goes. Excuse me. You want to rejoin us, Senator? Senator Winder.
Mr. Chairman, I would move we hold Senate Bill 1418 in committee.
I have a motion to hold this bill in committee by Senator Winder and a second from Senator Harris. Any discussion on that motion?
Mr. Chairman?
Yep.
I think the effort is commendable. And I think that even with the House bill that came over, There was some discussion about possible amendments before it got here. They chose not to do that. Then they'll also tell us, don't amend our bills or we'll kill them. So we're kind of in a very difficult situation. I think that this bill does some good things. I think it did involve tremendous effort on the part of our chairman to speak to a significant portion of our stakeholders. And I think the schools do have some say in this process. I do think that this is a Second Amendment bill, not a school safety bill. And to me, that's an important distinction, and that's probably why it's not in this, not in Education Committee, but in State Affairs. No matter what you do on these issues, there are going to be some that hate us and some that commend us. We get all sorts of threats via emails, very few face-to-face, because it's more difficult to look somebody in the eye and threaten you. But I really think that while this took a lot of steps in the right directions, I think in particular the training, I understand the testimony that was given on types of handguns or a rifle or whatever might be used, and the ammunition would be there. I think those are legitimate concerns. But I think as you look at this, I think that could really cause a major problem too with people defending themselves. Who's going to go buy a weapon? Who's going to be able to afford the training? How are the schools going to pay for it? There's still some issues here that aren't resolved. And for those teachers in the room, the chairman talked about, I don't know who won the first Super Bowl. I don't know who won the 50th, but I know who my best teachers were and my favorite people in life that had the best influence on me. And I respect that, and I thank each one of you as teachers for that service. For the law enforcement people that came and testified, thank you for that. And I think that's an important piece of this. But as I was thinking about, how does someone go into an active shooting situation and actually identify yourself as a friendly? Do you put on there, shoot me first? I mean, how do you do this? These are difficult issues to deal with. And so I think while there's some good thought here, and I commend the chairman for it, I just don't think this is the right answer for this solution. And I think we need to keep working on it.
Senator Wintrow.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think for the first time in my 10 years here, I was convinced today to vote in favor of a gun bill. And here's what I thought about this whole time. What do I do? What do I do? What do I do? I have an ideology. I have a philosophy, no guns in schools. And then I started to think about a session we had when we started the legislature this year. It was about negotiation and civility. And there was a presenter that talked about sometimes when we have our stake in the ground and we don't see our shared interests, we lose opportunities. And that our work as legislators are really about finding common interest and ground. And many times the stake we plant can get in the way of really good policy and things for people. And so I started to think about my own stake in the ground. And I started to soften as I listened to the testimony. And I realized I was holding on to an ideology just like everybody else. And that's not the best place to be as a legislator. And the job is to listen to the testimony, do all the research we can, think around it, and make the best decisions we can. And for the first time in 10 years, I'm ready to vote for a gun bill. I can't believe it. Hopefully my constituents are going to be okay with that. And I think I really respect the fact that the chair could get me off that position. People who know me know that's a tough position. But I do think the most striking thing to me today, I wrote it down, was the first person that testified, Mr. Gillis, who said, you know, we just can't willy-nilly be letting people have guns around, and that we recognize you don't have them at airports and courtrooms and schools. And that resonated with me. That helped my flag, right? But in the end, I don't want the guns in there at all, because I think every time you increase the chance, it's a problem. But in the end, I think you guys convinced me that teachers, school folks should be able to make those policies and make those choices without me interfering with my flag in the ground. I would offer, as we have this conversation, though, is to continue to think about ways to prevent. You know, when I was trained by my best mentor, he said, always be the most reasonable person in the room. I know that's shocking to you all.
Not shocking.
Come on. And he always said, try to make things go right. Do everything you can in your power to make it go right. And then when you have the crisis, manage it, right? And so that made me think about when I worked on college campuses where there was always crises. Oh my gosh, we had guns in camp. We had everything, suicides. And I always thought, I got to get upriver and do everything I can to create a good environment, do threat assessments, make sure that we decrease bullying, discrimination, all those things to decrease the acts of crises. But when push came to shove, we had to have a plan. And I think this bill provides a good framework for folks to get together in a good period of time to be thoughtful about what that would look like, because this is serious business to start allowing in time, place, and manner firearms where our most prized, lovely human beings are, kids and our teachers. So I just wanted to say thank you to everyone that participated. I don't support the motion to hold in committee. I can't believe it. But I think we should allow this to go to further discussion onto the floor because of all the work that has gone into it and has been very thoughtful. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Wintrow. Senator Lee.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. With a little reluctant, I'd like to make a substitute motion that we send Senate Bill 1418 to the 14th order for possible amendments.
We have a substitute motion on the floor to send Senate Bill 1418 to the 14th ordered for possible amendments. That motion was made by Senator Lee and a second by Senator Wintrow. Any discussion on that motion?
May I speak to my motion?
Yes, ma'am.
I see this as a school safety bill. The Second Amendment is very clear, but we have constructs already where our schools are different, our courts are different, and our airports are different. So in recognition of those differences, I recognize that these things can be treated differently, and I think the testimony is very compelling. We have a couple of efforts going on in this building, and my motion is intended to see if we can get a resolution that we can get, and some may say, you know, compromise is weakness. I think we've seen good policies move through this building when we get some, if you want to call it incremental, some people will call it bold steps. Is there still a path forward for this issue, this session? And I think moving this bill forward in a way that still keeps people to the table, yes and no, are simple answers to complex problems. And so it sometimes isn't just a yes and no. It's let's get back to the table. What are the pieces that we can appreciate in this piece of legislation instead of some of the bully emails and I think rigid positions that say, not this bill, it must be another bill. And I'm afraid that we might leave with nothing. And in some ways that's part of our process. But I'm hoping that we could get something to move this forward. I really was moved by all of the testimony, and that's thank you, Mr. Chairman, for letting me explain my motion.
Thank you.
And just clarification, I'm willing to move this to the 14th order because I see it as a school safety issue, not a gun bill, because I've said publicly before that I don't think that gun bills should be amended in the 14th order.
Thank you, Senator Lee. Senator Winder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would speak in opposition to the substitute motion. I think this type of a bill is going to be very difficult to amend in the amending order. I appreciate the courage of the good Assistant Majority Leader, since she has to preside over the amending order, that she would be willing to put herself through that. But I think we're better off holding it in committee, continuing to work on the issue. It may be some amendments to this, it may be some amendments to 415, and try and move forward something that we can get out that protects school safety and the Second Amendment.
Any further discussion on the motion? All right. No further discussion. Committee, we do have a substitute motion in front of us, which is to send Senate Bill 1418 to the 14th order for possible amendments. I'm going to call for a roll call vote on this. Madam Secretary. Thank you. And if you could take a roll call vote.
Senator Winder? No. Senator Anthony? Senator Harris? No. Senator Lee?
Aye.
Senator Taves?
No.
Senator Winthrop?
Aye.
Senator Ruckty?
Aye.
Senator Guthrie?
Aye.
Senator Burnt?
No. Yes.
Oh, Anthony was a no.
So on the substitute motion, we have 5 noes and 4 ayes. That motion fails. We do have the original motion by Senator Winder to hold Senate Bill 1418 in committee. Any discussion on that motion? Senator Winder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Again, just quick and short. I don't think this bill is quite the answer. I think it does some things that it doesn't need to do. I still think it's worth the effort to try and work not only on this bill as a possible amending, but I don't think it can be done in the amending order. As I said earlier, we still have 415 that we potentially could get to some agreement on that would meet more of the concerns voiced by the testimony today, and I think we need to keep working on this. And I would urge your support for the motion.
Thank you, Senator Winder. Any other discussion? Senator Anthony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. While I was sitting here, I looked up again, I can't help myself, the guns and ammo ranking of the best states for gun owners. It won't surprise anyone in Idaho to know that we're tied for the top. The states of Wyoming, Idaho, Montana, Utah, and North Dakota and Arizona all have a perfect 50 score in that analysis. And why did I bring that up? I hope it's a well-known fact for me that I'm a pro-Second Amendment guy. And I've been sitting here voting that way for, I think, 9 years now. I will also tell you that the chairman of this committee votes the same way. Someone said in the committee today that, and I think they were accurate, and I apologize, I forgot who it was, that everybody here believes in child safety. Everybody. I think everybody who's in this room who's advocated on both sides of this really does believe that their position is advancing that of child safety. And so I think we need not castigate anyone, especially our chairman, who has been a rock-solid advocate, in my opinion, for protecting and advancing the Second Amendment. I know him now well enough to know what he's trying to do. He's trying to get some a reasonable piece of legislation that can work for everybody. And that is tough sometimes, really, really tough. But I commend his efforts. Where I'm at today is I just don't think we're there. And I'm concerned that I'm leaving my gun owners behind. And so I'm gonna vote in favor of holding in committee with all those comments in consideration, I do want to commend the chairman for his continued work to protect the Second Amendment, but also to find some reasonable pathway forward on these really, really hard issues that are hard to thread. And so, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Senator Anthony. Senator Ruckty.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm going to vote against the motion. I wanted to start by complimenting the chairman, but now that everybody's complimented him, it's going to sound less significant. But I consider Chairman Guthrie to be the model of what a legislature should do and how a legislature should treat this job. I always have. But he takes on some of the toughest issues in this building that have left many people behind who have tried to address them. And he does it in a very professional way, does it in an inclusive way, does it in a thoughtful way. So we'll add that to his list of compliments this morning. But at the end of the day on this bill, I mean, it really is, there's two ways to view it. It's a gun rights bill or it's a school safety bill. And I'm a little concerned that those two are extremely difficult to mesh, because if you treat it as a gun rights bill, school safety takes a back seat. And vice versa, if you treat it as a school safety bill, then the rights of gun owners take a back seat. And both advocates feel strongly about that. Now, why do I think it should be viewed as a school safety bill? Because we're talking about a school. We're talking about students and teachers. We're talking about a professional environment where we're asking teachers and administrators and staff to provide a loving and safe environment for kids so they can thrive, they can, achieve, they can learn. To me, it just seems obvious that is how the prism we should view this bill through. And I recognize, as I've heard the comments of others on this committee and testimony, that we just have opposing views. And I'm not sure what that means for this issue, because it makes it extremely complicated to find something that I think works well for teachers and students and staff. So that's not really a comment that provides a lot of enlightenment about how to move forward, but maybe it's just more to explain that this is a tough one to figure out.
Thank you, Senator Ruckty. Senator Winder.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This is really a difficult issue, and I've heard today in testimony that we separate our courthouses and we separate our airports. We do that by making them fortresses. We put detection devices in. We strip search people. I don't think that's what we want for our schools, so we're trying to figure out somewhere in between that there's a sweet spot, and we haven't achieved it yet. I think it's well worth the effort to continue to work on it, and hopefully we can get there. But I don't think anybody wants our schools to be a fortress where you have to have metal detectors that are like in a New York or Chicago in their urban schools. But we're trying to find that balance where the kids feel safe, where the teachers feel safe, and where if an incident does occur, there are adults there that can help protect themselves, but also the students that are there. So it's a difficult balance. I hope you all understand that.
Thank you, Senator Winder. Senator Wintrow, did you you had your light on you? Okay. This is, for me, this is a pretty tough issue, and talking about guns or other issues is never an easy one, especially when there's differences of opinion, and they're always passionate. But if there's one thing that I've learned as being low man on the totem pole, and the senator on this dais that probably does have the least amount of experience, I look to these other senators who have been here for much longer than I have, who spent many more hours around big conference tables having tough discussions. And in these conversations leading up to this vote, there's been talk about Senator Guthrie and his leadership, and if there's one thing that I've learned from Senator Guthrie, it's that when having these discussions, you know you're in a good place when folks on both sides aren't comfortable with the outcome. That means that, you know, we gave up a little bit here, we gave up a little bit here, we met in the middle with some reasonable conversation. Now, I don't know whether this bill is going to pass and go to the floor. I don't know. But if it doesn't, I would hope that every single stakeholder in this room will step up and have these hard discussions. It's incredibly important because we're talking about children. We're talking about hundreds of schools throughout this good state that are full of kids. Now, whether you're for the Second Amendment or whether you're not, come to the table and have these discussions. I think it's incredibly important. I think that whether this bill passes today or not, I think that this is always going to be an important issue, and just my 2 cents. I just hope that we can. I hope that we can come together and craft some reasonable legislation that will benefit all children throughout Idaho. So, enough of that. Thank you.
So you're against?
I think let's do another roll call vote, Madam. Ms. Winthrop.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And just one final comment is that I do think that I don't see it necessarily as a Second Amendment or a school safety issue. To me, what happened for me today was a pretty important learning moment. In that, again, you can be reasonable and balanced in your approach, and you can respect each thing. They can live together.
Right.
And so I really believe that, and I am appreciative to the lesson that I had today. And I think finally, just thank you, Vice Chair. Let's also go forward and think about how we can make things go right instead of just the response, and support, the kind of classrooms that happens in, so we can head off bullying, discrimination, because those are the things that really increase the risk. So let's look at helping things go right as well. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Senator Winthrop. I don't see any lights on, so let's call for the question. And Madam Secretary, if we could do a roll call, appreciate that.
Senator Winder.
Aye.
Senator Anthony.
Aye.
Senator Harris.
Aye.
Senator Lee.
No.
Senator Taves.
Aye.
Senator Winthrop.
No.
Senator Ruckty.
No.
Vice Chair Burnt.
Yes.
Senator Guthrie.
The motion by Senator Winder, I don't remember who the second was, Senator Harris, to hold Senate Bill 1418 in committee passes 5-4 vote.